Okay, good morning. So, I was typing out lots of answers, and I figured I would just come and answer all the questions and then go over some of the tools that I use and some things about temperature. Okay? So, some of you last night, or actually this morning, woke up and noticed that your bowl didn't have any bubbles in it, or maybe it had some, but not a lot. Heather, your guy said that it was kind of stretchy but didn't have any bubbles. Bernie, yours had no bubbles. Heather Margaret, yours had lots of bubbles and smells great. So that could be a couple of things. If your kitchen is, if your yeast is old, so if you're not sure how fresh or new your yeast is, you can take a little bit of it, like a little sprinkle, and pour it on some warm water with a tiny little bit of flour and a tiny little bit of sugar. Mix it up and leave it for 5 minutes. If it gets bubbly and frothy, then it's good. And then we call that proofing your yeast. Sometimes you'll do that to test it if you haven't used it in a while. If you have, what do you call it? If your yeast is good and it just didn't get bubbly, it could be that the water you started with was too cold. And so it didn't have enough heat to kind of get going. That's okay, because it is growing. It's just growing very, very slowly. Which means you can leave it longer. You can just put it in your kitchen on the counter and just leave it until it looks bubbly. If you proofed your yeast, if you took a little sprinkle and mixed it with flour and water, a little sugar, and it didn't bubble, it could be that your yeast is old. But from the pictures I've seen so far, they all look pretty good. So if your yeast is good, we're going to put more into it today. So we put half the yeast in last night. I'm going to use another half a teaspoon today. So that will give it another bump of rising power. Bernie, you said yours just looks like pancake mix and didn't rise at all. So before you add more flour to that and put more ingredients in it, do that. Take a little sprinkle of the yeast, put it in warm water. And when I say warm, I mean like not over 100 degrees, but like 99 degrees. No more than 110, because 110 will kill your yeast. So you need to be warm enough to wake it up, but not so hot that it kills it. So, speaking of temperature, I just took the temperature of my dough. I have a little, what do I call it? Thermometer. And I use this thermometer for lots of things. It's not a specific baking thermometer. It's just an instant read thermometer. And so I pulled my dough in from outside. I brought it in the kitchen. It's been here for 2 hours. It's still only 50 degrees, which is really cold. But I'm not going to wait until it gets to 75, because in my kitchen it never will. 74 degrees is the perfect temperature for your yeast to grow. So that means when I go to add my water later, I'm going to make sure that my water is warmer than it normally would be. So that when I mix it up with my hands, it feels like bath water. That's the temperature that I want. I don't want to stick my hands in it and have it be cold. So if you did your poolish on the counter and it was always 75 degrees, then when you added your water, you would want your water to be roughly 75 degrees. But if your kitchen is cold or your poolish is cold, then you're going to want to increase that temperature of the water so that your dough is going to be roughly 75 degrees. Now you'll know, you could use a thermometer, but you'll know it by touching it. Like 75 degrees feels like, I don't know how to describe it. It's not cold, but it's not warm like a person with a fever. You know, I'd pick up a person with a fever and you're like, oh, that baby's hot. But a happy baby, you pick them up and they're warm and cuddly. That's what it feels like. All right, I don't know if that helps you. Or you could use a thermometer. If you put your hands in it and it's cold, it's too cold. Friction from kneading will rise the temperature a little bit by like 4 or 5 degrees, but not much more than that. So water, the temperature of your water will adjust how warm your dough is. Don't use boiling water. You'll kill the yeast. That'll be it. It'll be done. You'll have wasted all your flour. So now I'm going to turn around. I'm going to show you some of the tools that I use. Now, some of them are necessary. You must have a bowl. You must have a bowl. But you don't need to have a fancy rising bowl. You can use a regular bowl. So I'm going to give you a little tour of my simple tools that I use. Okay, so this is my bowl for rising. It is a big honkin'.
It's very big.
I think it's like, I don't know, 8 quarts. It's pretty big. I like it because the sides are kind of tall. So when the dough rises, it puffs up and it has a lid. If you don't have a bowl with a lid, you can use plastic wrap. You can use a really thin kitchen towel. So these are kitchen towels. You can get them at Big Lots. You can get them at Target. They're usually about $1 a piece. They're simple. They're cotton. They're pretty big. Oops, how big are they? Pretty big. They're great for drying dishes. There's no lint on them. They're not fuzzy. In a pinch, not these ones, but in a pinch, you could have separate ones for cloth diapering your baby, but that's a different story. But not these ones. These are kitchen only. These are brand new and fresh. That goes there. This is my scraper, and when I'm kneading really sticky dough, I use it to scrape the bench. It's a bench scrape. I use it to cut my dough into pieces. I think it cost me $3 at a kitchen supply place.
Very useful.
Yeah, it's like super handy dandy. You need measuring tools. You need a liquid measure cup. You need measuring spoons. You can use dry measure cups, or you can use a scale. Because I used to cook on large scale, I used to weigh my ingredients.
Scales tend to be more accurate.
Yes, scales do tend to be more accurate, but regular measuring cups, you know, that come in different measures are perfectly fine. Now, to bake your dough, to bake your bread, you have a couple of choices. You can put it in a regular old-fashioned bread pan. Make sure you grease it really well and flour it so it doesn't stick. You could use a stoneware pan. That will help give it a really crusty crust. Again, well seasoned. I usually just take a little olive oil and rub it down. When I bake for my household, I have these willow rising bowls. And so when I get to the end and I shape my dough, I put them into a basket like this that's covered in flour. And they rise, and then I turn them over onto like a pizza peel and a piece of parchment paper, and I put them right on my baking stone in my oven. If you have a pizza stone, you can do the same thing. If you don't have one of these, that's perfectly okay. You can totally use regular bowls and loaf pans. But if you want to be fancy, right? You say, but Mare, I don't have a pizza stone. I don't have any stoneware. You can bake your bread in a Dutch oven. And this is a really nifty thing because it gets super, super, super hot. Now mine is well used and well seasoned. I got this at Aldi's for probably $20. But you can, when you get to the last part of your dough rising, shape the loaf, put it in here, sprinkle a little water on it, and stick it in the hot oven. And that will steam it beautifully, and you'll get that crispy crust. The other tool that I use, which I'm not going to use today because I already have pre-made flour, is I have a grain mill. And so if I buy my grain right from a farmer, and I buy it in great big giant bags of wheat berries, and I can grind them with a nifty machine. So I grind them right before I use them. So the wheat berries go right in here, and they come out the side, and this one plugs in. Whoops. And then this nifty thing plugs in there, and then this fills with flour. So I'll do that right before I go to use it. So it's super fresh. It's easy to store. because the wheat berries are easier to store for me than flour, because I can put them in great big buckets and then I can grind it for how I want. So if I want it coarse, if I'm making a really rustic thing, I can grind it really fine. If I'm making pastry, on my machine, I usually keep it on coarse, but even the coarse grind is really very fine. And then I mix half fresh ground with half just all-purpose flour. I did update the recipe measurements. If you go down to last night's post, it had the first part of flour, salt, water. Underneath it, I did put update, and I put what you're going to need for today. I put in the measurements of how much water. I think it's like 2.5 cups of water, between 5 and 6 cups of flour, and that's just a little less than a 5-pound bag. So that's about how much flour it'll take to make the dough and have enough to flour your surface, dust your loaf pan that you're going to actually cook it in. And so I'm going to put these things away, and then I'm going to take out my actual ingredients and my bowl, and I'll have one of my camera kids come and film the next part of the actual mixing of the dough and the kneading of the dough and then setting it to rise. So that's probably like 20 minutes of work to actually mix it up, and you can mix it by hand or you can use a mixer if you have one. They both work equally well. I will say, if you use a mixer, at the end of using the mixer, take it out and mix it by hand anyway, because then you'll feel it, and it does a good finishing job of maybe you'll feel the elasticity of the dough. And then we'll set it to rise. I have a very cold kitchen, so in the winter, it's usually roughly 55 degrees in here, unless the oven is on. So I actually put my oven on early, and it heats up my stone. For those of you who have normal homes and normal heat, about an hour before you're ready to bake, you're going to want to heat your oven. You're going to want to heat your oven. And it's going to be hot. It's going to be like 400, maybe 450. But that's a couple of hours from now. So whenever you get a chance to watch the video, have at it. And I will see you all later.